Did medieval women live lives of endless suffering? Were children seen as disposable objects in a harsh world? We are talking about the period between 500 CE and 1500 CE. Number 6. Medieval women were subservient and had no power. People sometimes believe that medieval women were entirely powerless, confined to their homes, and ruled completely by their fathers, brothers, and husbands. This picture often paints a world where women had no voice, no property rights, and no role in society beyond bearing children and managing a household. The common story suggests their lives were strictly limited, with men making all the important decisions. It is easy to think of a rigid hierarchy where women always came second, their opinions disregarded, their ambitions stifled. This idea often comes from a modern misunderstanding of historical power structures and the diverse experiences of women across different social classes and regions during the Middle Ages. The visual of a cloistered, silent woman might spring to mind, a figure totally isolated from public life, with no agency in her own destiny or the destiny of her family. This narrative ignores the many ways women actually shaped their lives and the world around them. However, the historical records paint another picture, one filled with women who held significant influence, owned property, ran businesses, and even wielded political power. While laws and customs often favored men, women found numerous avenues to exert authority and secure their interests. For example, noble women frequently managed vast estates when their husbands were away at war, on crusades, or on diplomatic missions. These women were not just caretakers, they were administrators overseeing agricultural production, collecting rents, managing household staff, and even dispensing justice in their lord's absence. Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most famous medieval women, ruled her own powerful duchy and kingdom, often independently, and actively participated in politics, even leading armies. Her story is a testament to the fact that queens and duchesses could be formidable figures, shaping alliances and wielding immense power. They often acted as regents for underage sons, effectively governing entire realms for years, making decisions that impacted thousands of people. Beyond the nobility, women in towns and cities also played vital economic roles. Many women were actively involved in crafts and trade, often alongside their husbands, but sometimes independently. Guild records show that women worked as brewers, bakers, textile workers, mercers, and even goldsmiths. Some guilds, particularly in the textile industry, were almost exclusively female, highlighting their significant contribution to the economy. A woman could inherit her husband's business and continue to run it after his death, often with full legal recognition. These femmes sole, or single women, a legal term for independent women, whether widowed or unmarried, could enter into contracts, sue and be sued, and conduct their own business affairs. They were not just helping, they were the primary proprietors, managing finances, apprentices, and production. City ordinances in places like London and Paris acknowledged and regulated the work of these independent businesswomen, proving their active presence in the marketplace. Even within the domestic sphere, which is often seen as limiting, women held considerable authority. The lady of the house, particularly in larger households, managed a complex domestic economy, overseeing the preparation of food, the making of clothes, the education of children, and the health of the family. She was the chief steward of the home, a role that required sharp organizational skills and a deep understanding of household management. Legal documents from various parts of Europe show that women could own land, inherit property, and even make wills, distributing their wealth as they saw fit. While daughters might receive a smaller share than sons, or property might be tied to marriage settlements, women often retained control over their dowry and could use it to support themselves or their families. The religious life offered another path to power and influence for women. Abbesses of powerful convents were often highly educated women who managed large estates, exercised spiritual authority over both nuns and lay people, and sometimes even advised kings and queens. These convents were centers of learning, art, and economic activity, providing women with opportunities for leadership and intellectual pursuits that might not have been available elsewhere. For instance, Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess, was a renowned visionary, composer, philosopher, and medical writer whose influence spread across Europe. Her story, along with those of countless other abbesses, demonstrates the significant power and respect these women commanded, not just within their religious orders, but within the broader society. Their decisions impacted land ownership, financial investments, and the spiritual well-being of entire communities. Further evidence of women's agency comes from legal records concerning marriage. While arranged marriages were common, especially among the elite, women were not always passive participants. There are accounts of women resisting unwanted unions, appealing to church courts for annulments, or even running away. The church, though patriarchal, also offered some protections for women, particularly against forced marriages. A marriage was considered valid only if both parties freely consented, a principle that, though not always perfectly applied, gave women a legal basis to challenge coercion. Dowries, though often seen as a transaction, also provided women with a measure of financial security and leverage within a marriage. If a husband mistreated his wife, her family might reclaim the dowry, creating a powerful incentive for him to treat her well. Women could also petition for separation or divorce in certain circumstances, particularly in cases of severe abuse or neglect, though true divorce, as we understand it today, was rare. These legal avenues, while limited, underscore that women were not entirely without recourse or power in their marital relationships. Number 5. Medieval women were uneducated and illiterate. It is often thought that medieval women, especially outside of royal courts, lived in a world without books, unable to read or write, their minds uncultivated. This view suggests that literacy was almost exclusively the domain of men, particularly clergy and scholars, with women relegated to a life of practical skills and domestic duties, never touching a quill or parchment. The popular image presents medieval society as largely illiterate, and when it comes to women, this perceived lack of education is often amplified, leading to the assumption that intellectual pursuits were simply not part of their lives or opportunities. This idea of widespread female illiteracy, even among the wealthy, sometimes implies a deliberate exclusion of women from learning, painting a picture of a society that saw no value in educating its female members beyond basic religious instruction. However, historical evidence reveals a far more nuanced and complex reality regarding female literacy and education during the Middle Ages. While universal literacy for both men and women was not common, many women, particularly from the nobility, monastic orders, and the burgeoning merchant class, possessed significant literary skills. So noblewomen were often educated at home by tutors, learning to read, write, and sometimes even to speak multiple languages. This education was not just for spiritual edification, it was practical. As administrators of estates, managers of households, and political figures, they needed to read letters, keep accounts, and understand legal documents. Queens and duchesses like Christine de Pizan, an educated woman who became a professional writer in the late 14th and early 15th centuries, demonstrate the intellectual capabilities and educational opportunities available to some women. Christine de Pizan wrote extensive works, including The Book of the City of Ladies, a powerful defense of women's intellectual and moral capabilities. Her very existence as a professional writer challenges the notion of universal female illiteracy. Convents were centers of learning for women, providing an environment where nuns and lay sisters could receive extensive education. They learned to read and write Latin, the language of scholarship and the church, and often developed skills in calligraphy, manuscript illumination, and even composition. Abbesses, as mentioned before, managed complex institutions and often had vast libraries. The Ratsvita of Gandersheim, a 10th century German canoness, wrote plays, poems, and historical accounts, making her one of the earliest known female dramatists in the West. Her works show a deep understanding of classical literature and Christian theology, proving the high level of intellectual training available in some monastic settings. These women were not just passively consuming knowledge, they were actively producing it, contributing to the intellectual and literary landscape of their time. Beyond the elite and monastic circles, literacy also extended to urban women, especially those involved in commerce. The wives and daughters of merchants and artisans often learned to read and write to assist with family businesses. They would manage accounts, write letters to suppliers, and keep records of transactions. For a merchant family, a literate wife was a valuable asset, helping to run the business efficiently and expand its reach. Archaeological finds and surviving business documents attest to the involvement of women in these commercial activities, which often required literacy. While their literacy might have been more practical than academic, it was still a significant skill that allowed them to participate actively in the economic life of their communities. Shop signs and inventory lists often reveal the hand of women involved in their creation and management. Furthermore, religious devotion encouraged literacy among women. For many, reading the Bible, Psalters, and books of hours was a path to spiritual enlightenment. These devotional texts were often beautifully illuminated and became cherished possessions. While some might have memorized prayers or relied on priests, many women, particularly those of the rising middle classes, owned and read these books themselves. The widespread production of vernacular religious texts, not just Latin ones, also suggests a growing demand for literacy among a broader segment of the population, including women. Personal letters and household accounts from the later Middle Ages also reveal that many women could write, corresponding with family members and managing their domestic affairs on paper. These fragments of daily life demonstrate a quiet but widespread literacy that often goes unacknowledged. Even among women who could not write themselves, patronage of literature and art was common. Many wealthy women commissioned books, supported artists, and established libraries. This patronage indicates an appreciation for learning and culture, even if they relied on scribes for the actual act of writing. Their intellectual engagement was not limited to their own ability to put pen to paper. They were consumers and facilitators of knowledge, contributing to the intellectual vibrancy of the age. So, while the percentage of literate women varied greatly depending on social class, region, and time period, it is clear that the image of an entirely illiterate medieval female population is a simplification that ignores the rich tapestry of their educational experiences and contributions. Number 4. Medieval mothers did not love their children due to high infant mortality. It is a common and distressing idea that medieval parents, particularly mothers, held a detached attitude towards their children because of the alarmingly high rates of infant and child mortality. The thought often is that because so many children died young, parents simply could not afford to become too emotionally attached, viewing their offspring almost as replaceable. This notion suggests a cold pragmatism, a defense mechanism against inevitable loss, leading to a lack of deep parental love or grief. Some might even suggest that children were seen as economic units, and their early deaths were met with stoicism rather than profound sorrow. This belief paints medieval family life as emotionally barren, where the emotional bonds we associate with modern parenthood were largely absent. However, extensive historical evidence contradicts this bleak assessment, revealing that medieval parents loved their children deeply, grieved intensely when they died, and invested significant care in their upbringing, despite the heartbreaking prevalence of childhood death. The sources, ranging from wills, letters, and epitaphs to religious texts and artistic depictions, consistently portray strong emotional bonds and profound sorrow at the loss of a child. For example, medieval wills frequently mention children with great affection, leaving them specific bequests, often with detailed instructions for their care and education. A father might leave a sum of money for his son's schooling, or a mother might leave a cherished piece of jewelry to her daughter. These careful provisions speak volumes about their hopes and plans for their children's futures, indicating deep love and commitment. Grief over a child's death is vividly documented. Epitaphs on gravestones often express profound sorrow, describing children as dearly beloved, sweet, or lost too soon. Parents commissioned elaborate tombs for their deceased children, sometimes featuring detailed effigies, demonstrating a desire to honor their memory and mourn their loss publicly. Personal letters from medieval parents often reveal heartfelt lamentations upon the death of a child, filled with expressions of agony and sadness. A letter from a father might describe his overwhelming sorrow, stating that he feels his heart has been torn out, or a mother might write of her constant tears and inability to find comfort. These intimate expressions of grief are indistinguishable from those of parents in any era, refuting the idea of emotional detachment. Religious practices also underscore parental love. The elaborate rituals surrounding christening, often performed very soon after birth due to fears of infant death without baptism, show a profound concern for the child's spiritual well-being and future in the afterlife. Parents eagerly sought godparents for their children, forging social and spiritual bonds that were intended to support the child throughout their life. The naming of children, often after beloved family members, saints, or even parents themselves, indicates a desire for connection and continuation. When children died, parents would often pray for their souls, make charitable donations in their memory, or even undertake pilgrimages, all acts of devotion that reflect deep love and a desire for their child's salvation. Furthermore, medieval medical texts and household manuals offer advice on childcare, showing a clear concern for the health and welfare of infants and young children. While medical knowledge was limited by modern standards, parents and caregivers used the best available methods, preparing special foods, using herbal remedies, and keeping children warm and clean. The employment of wet nurses, while sometimes seen as a sign of detachment, was often a practical choice for mothers who needed to work or whose health did not allow them to nurse, and often involved careful selection and oversight to ensure the child received good care. Many mothers who used wet nurses maintained close contact with their babies, visiting them regularly and ensuring their well-being. Even when children were sent away for fostering or apprenticeship, as was common among some social classes, it was often with the aim of providing them with better opportunities or education, not a sign of abandonment. Artistic depictions also speak to the strong emotional bonds. Images of the Madonna and child, so prevalent in medieval art, often portray a tender, loving relationship between mother and infant, influencing the cultural perception of motherhood. While these are religious icons, they reflect and reinforce contemporary ideals of maternal affection. Secular art, though rarer, also shows families together, with parents holding or interacting affectionately with their children. These visual representations, combined with written records, paint a picture of deeply felt parental love, sorrow at loss, and genuine investment in the lives of their children. The idea that medieval parents lacked love for their children due to high mortality rates is a misconception that overlooks the rich emotional lives and cultural practices of the era. Number 3. Children were treated as miniature adults. A very persistent myth about medieval childhood suggests that once children were past infancy, they were immediately seen and treated as small adults, with no distinct period of childhood as we understand it today. This idea implies that children were expected to take on adult responsibilities, engage in adult labor, and conform to adult social norms from a very young age, without any allowance for play, education tailored to their age, or the unique developmental stages of youth. The image is often of a child dressed in adult clothing, performing adult tasks, with no real recognition of their immaturity or the need for a protected, playful phase of life. This myth often supports the broader, incorrect notion that medieval society was too harsh to afford its youngest members a distinct period of protected innocence. However, historical evidence clearly shows that medieval society recognized and valued childhood as a distinct and important phase of life, with specific expectations, activities, and forms of dress appropriate for different ages. While children certainly took on responsibilities earlier than many do in modern Western societies, there was a clear understanding of the progression from infancy to adolescence and then to adulthood. Infants were swaddled and cared for, often remaining close to their mothers or wet nurses. Once they began to walk and talk, they entered a stage of early childhood characterized by play and preliminary learning, much like toddlers and young children today. Toys were common, demonstrating that play was an integral part of childhood. Archaeological digs have unearthed numerous medieval toys, including miniature bows and arrows, hobby horses, wooden dolls, spinning tops, and even tiny pottery sets. These surviving illustrations and manuscripts often depict children engaged in games like hide and seek, tag, or playing with animals. These images showcase a lively, playful childhood, not one where children were immediately forced into adult roles. Children also had dedicated play spaces, often within the home or courtyard, where they could engage in unstructured activities. The very existence of these toys and depictions of play suggests a societal recognition of childhood as a period for recreation and development, distinct from adult work. Clothing, too, differed for children. While very young children might have worn simple, loose garments that resembled tunics, older children often wore clothes that were distinctly different from adult fashions. For instance, boys might wear shorter tunics than men, or clothes that allowed for more movement, indicating their active lives. Little girls' dresses, while similar in style, were often scaled down and less restrictive than adult formal wear. This differentiation in dress, though not as pronounced as in later centuries, still marked children as distinct from adults, providing comfort and practicality for their age-appropriate activities. The idea of children being dressed identically to adults often comes from later periods of art history, not from the heart of the Middle Ages. Education, while not always formal schooling, was also tailored to age. Young children learned basic skills and moral lessons within the family, often through stories, rhymes, and imitation. As they grew older, boys might be sent to learn a trade as apprentices, or to serve as pages in a noble household. Girls might learn household management, textile production, or specific crafts. While these were preparations for adult roles, they were also structured learning environments, often starting around the age of 7 or 8, recognizing that children needed training and guidance. As apprenticeships were not simply about labor, they were about learning a craft under the guidance of a master, a process that recognized the child's developing skills and need for instruction. The page stage in a noble household was also a period of learning manners, chivalry, and basic literacy, a distinct phase before becoming a squire. Legal distinctions also recognized different stages of childhood. For example, the age of consent for marriage varied, but it was generally lower than adulthood, indicating a recognition that adolescents were not fully adults. The age of criminal responsibility also varied, but younger children were often treated differently by the law than adults, suggesting an understanding of their limited capacity for full adult judgment. The church law also had specific provisions for children, acknowledging their status as minors. These legal frameworks underscore that medieval society did not simply view children as miniature adults, but rather as individuals progressing through distinct developmental stages, requiring different care, education, and legal considerations at each phase. So, while medieval childhood might have looked different from today, it was unequivocally recognized as a unique and important part of life. Number 2, childbirth was always deadly and unassisted. A very common and grim picture of medieval childbirth depicts it as an almost universally fatal event for both mother and child, a solitary struggle endured by women with little to no help in unsanitary conditions. This narrative often suggests that women gave birth alone or with only the most basic, unskillful assistance, leading to widespread death and immense suffering. The perception is one of extreme danger, a lottery of life and death, where the absence of modern medical knowledge meant that complications inevitably led to tragedy, and women were largely abandoned to their fate. This idea often ignores any form of organized care or traditional wisdom, presenting medieval childbirth as a barbaric and primitive ordeal. However, historical records clearly demonstrate that medieval childbirth, while certainly dangerous, was not always a death sentence, and women received a considerable amount of assistance, mostly from experienced female attendants known as midwives. The midwifery was a highly respected and essential profession throughout the Middle Ages, with midwives playing a central role in the birthing process. These women were not just casual helpers, they were skilled practitioners with extensive practical knowledge gained through experience, mentorship, and sometimes even formal training. They understood the stages of labor, knew how to assist with difficult births, and provided crucial emotional support to the laboring woman. Their role was recognized and even regulated in some towns, with midwives often required to take an oath to perform their duties faithfully. Childbirth typically took place in the woman's home, in a familiar and comforting environment surrounded by other women. The birthing chamber was usually a private space prepared specifically for the event, often with warm water, clean linens, and sometimes even special religious items to ensure a safe delivery. The practice of lying in, where a woman rested for a period after childbirth, often for several weeks, was a common custom that provided essential recovery time. During this period, female relatives, neighbors, and sometimes hired help would assist the new mother with household duties and childcare, recognizing her need for rest and support. This collective female support network was vital, offering practical help, emotional encouragement, and shared wisdom. While maternal mortality rates were indeed higher than today, they were not universally fatal. The vast majority of births were successful, resulting in healthy mothers and babies. Deaths often occurred due to complications like hemorrhage, infection, or prolonged labor, but midwives had various techniques to address these issues within the limits of their knowledge. They might use herbal remedies, massage, or specific positions to aid delivery. In cases of extreme difficulty, even surgical interventions were known, though highly risky. The survival of populations throughout the Middle Ages, despite high birth rates, is itself testament to the fact that most women and babies survived childbirth. If every birth was fatal, medieval society simply would not have continued. Religious rituals also played a significant role, providing comfort and hope. Women would pray to saints, particularly the Virgin Mary, for a safe delivery. After birth, thanksgiving rituals were common, acknowledging divine assistance in the safe passage of mother and child. These spiritual practices, while not medical, provided crucial psychological support and a sense of community. The fear of death was real, but it was often mitigated by faith in the reassuring presence of experienced women. The idea of childbirth being an unassisted, barbaric ordeal often comes from a lack of understanding of the extensive female support networks and the professional role of midwives. Childbirth was a communal and often spiritual event, not a solitary struggle in the dark. Number 1. Children were frequently abandoned or sold. It is a common misconception that medieval parents often abandoned their children or sold them into servitude due to poverty or a lack of familial bonds. This idea suggests a widespread, callous disregard for offspring, born out of harsh living conditions and a perceived absence of emotional attachment. The image might be of parents leaving infants at church doors or directly selling older children for economic gain, implying that children were readily disposable commodities in a difficult world. This narrative often casts medieval parents as uncaring and opportunistic, willing to sever family ties for financial or practical reasons, rather than seeking to protect and nurture their young. However, historical evidence consistently demonstrates that the abandonment or sale of children was an extremely rare and socially condemned practice, not a common occurrence. While poverty and hardship were realities, the primary response of medieval families was to strive to keep their children, to integrate them into the family unit, and to secure their future, often through apprenticeships or fosterage, which were very different from abandonment or sale. The church and legal systems strongly condemned the abandonment of children, viewing it as a serious moral and often criminal offense. Foundlings, children who were genuinely abandoned, were typically cared for by charitable institutions like orphanages run by the church or benevolent individuals, indicating societal concern for their welfare rather than widespread indifference. These institutions existed precisely because abandonment was an exception, a tragic circumstance that required a communal response, not a normal part of family life. The system of apprenticeship, often mistaken for selling children, was a structured and respectable practice for educating and training children in a specific trade or craft. Parents would formally contract with a master craftsman or merchant to take their child, usually a boy, as an apprentice for a set number of years. During this time, the master was obligated to feed, clothe, house, and teach the child, not just exploit their labor. The child, in turn, learned valuable skills that would enable them to earn a living as an adult. This was an investment in the child's future, a way to ensure they gained a livelihood, especially for families who could not provide such training themselves. Apprenticeship was a path to upward mobility and economic security, not a form of enslavement or abandonment. Parents remained in contact with their apprentice children, and contracts often included provisions for their well-being and return after their term. Similarly, fostering, where children from noble or wealthy families were sent to live and be educated in another household, was also a common practice. This was not abandonment, but a way to provide children with broader social connections, courtly manners, and skills that could not be taught at home. For example, a young noble boy might be sent to serve as a page in a powerful lord's castle, learning etiquette, horsemanship, and martial skills, often in preparation for a career in arms or administration. Girls might be sent to another noble household or a convent to learn domestic management, literacy, and courtly arts. These arrangements were reciprocal and honorable, designed to enrich the child's upbringing and expand their opportunities, maintaining family ties and prestige. The concept of a child being sold into servitude, in the sense of chattel slavery, was largely absent in medieval Western Europe after the early Middle Ages. While forms of serfdom existed, tying peasants to the land, this was not the same as the buying and selling of children. If children worked, it was typically within the family unit or under formal, structured arrangements like apprenticeships, which provided protections and educational opportunities. The idea of direct sale, implying a complete severance of family bonds for profit, simply does not align with the social and legal structures of the time. The emotional and cultural value placed on children, as seen in wills, religious practices, and expressions of grief, further undermines the notion of widespread abandonment or sale. Medieval parents, like parents in any era, largely sought to care for, protect, and raise their children, even in the face of profound challenges.